Okay, let's get right into it. We're going to break down the core theories of social science research, everything you absolutely need to know to crush your exam. So, here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with positivism, then get into its reasoning toolkit. After that, we'll look at some major critiques, and finally, see how all these theories actually play out in a real-world case study. All right, so let's start with the big one, the question that's at the heart of all social research. How do we actually know if something is true in the social world? I mean, in physics, you can run an experiment, right? But with people and societies, it's a whole lot messier. And the way different researchers try to answer this question, well, that's the foundation for everything we're about to cover. First up, positivism. This is really the foundation of a lot of social science. The big idea here is that we can study the social world with the same kind of scientific objectivity we use for things like, say, biology or chemistry. So, what does that mean exactly? Well, positivists believe there's a real, objective social world out there, one that exists whether we're aware of it or not. The goal, then, is to discover the unbiased scientific facts about how that world works. Okay, now, classical positivism, which came from thinkers like Auguste Comte, is built on four main pillars. You're definitely going to want to have these down for your exam, so let's walk through each one. First up is naturalism. This is basically the idea that the social world and the natural world are fundamentally alike. They both operate under consistent rules, or laws. So there's a real objective social reality out there just waiting for us to discover it. Second, we've got empiricism. This one's a pretty strict rule. It says that real knowledge can only come from things we can experience with our senses, what we can see, hear, or measure. The exam takeaway says it all. If you can't observe it, you can't know it. Simple as that. Third, the search for laws. For a positivist, it's not enough to just describe society. No, the real goal is to find these universal cause and effect laws that explain why people behave the way they do. Think of it like a social version of the law of gravity. And finally, number 4, the separation of facts and values. This is a big one. Positivism argues that a researcher's personal beliefs and values can be, and should be, completely separated from the objective facts they're studying. The idea is that this makes truly unbiased, value-free knowledge possible. Okay, so if you're a positivist, how do you actually go about discovering these laws? Well, you've got a reasoning toolkit with 2 key methods, and it is absolutely vital you know the difference between them. So it really just comes down to the direction you're moving in. Induction is what we call bottom-up. You start with very specific observations, you see some patterns, and you build your way up to a general theory. Deduction, on the other hand, is top-down. You start with a big general theory and use it to make a specific prediction that you can then go out and test. Now, this whole idea evolved over time, leading to what's known as logical positivism. This was a 20th century update, and it really doubled down on that deductive theory-first approach. It combined the observation part of empiricism with the power of formal logic, almost like math. And this brings us to a concept that is so important for your exam, falsifiability. Karl Popper was the big name behind this, and his idea literally changed the game. He said that what makes a theory scientific isn't just that you can prove it right, it's that you can potentially prove it wrong. A good scientific theory has to stick its neck out and make a risky prediction. If there's no possible observation that could ever disprove your theory, well then it's just not science. But of course, not everyone was on board with this super scientific approach. I mean, is society really that neat and tidy? A lot of thinkers said no way, arguing that the social world is way too complex for these kinds of rigid rules. So let's dive into the main challenges to positivism. For your exam, you really need to know these 3 big alternatives. We've got scientific realism, interpretivism, and critical realism. Each one offers a totally different answer to that big question we started with. How do we know what's true? Okay, first, scientific realism. Now, these guys agree with the positivists on one key point. There is a real world out there. But, and this is the huge difference, they say that reality isn't just what we can see. It also includes unobservable things like deep social structures or power dynamics. These invisible forces are just as real, and they're what cause the stuff we can see. Then you've got interpretivism, which just takes a completely different path. It throws out the whole foundation of positivism. Interpretivists argue that the social world isn't objective at all. Why? Because we create it through our shared meanings, our language, our culture. So for them, the goal isn't to find universal laws. It's to understand subjective human experience from the inside. And that brings us to critical realism, which kind of tries to find a middle path. It says, yes, there's a real external world. But, and here's the catch, we can never see it directly. Our knowledge is always filtered through our own minds, our own theories, our own biases. So the key isn't to pretend we're objective, but to be critically aware of how our own perspective is shaping what we think we know. All right, that's a lot of theory, I know. So let's make it real. To see just how different these approaches are in practice, let's look at how each one would try to explain the same event, the ethnic conflict in the former Yugoslavia. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. Look at the difference. A positivist would focus on what they can observe and measure, right? So they'd look at the rational choices of politicians and say, hey, this war was driven by strategic calculations. But an interpretivist, they're going to look at something totally different, like public speeches and discourse, to understand how ethnic identities were socially constructed and used to fuel the conflict. And then you have the critical realist, who tries to connect the dots. They'd look at both the observable actions of the elites and those deep, unobservable historical structures that created the conditions for war in the first place. You see? Same event, three completely different stories. If you really want to lock these concepts in, remember that the full summary and a bunch of practice tests are all available at gradeguru.nl. It's a great way to prep for the exam. Okay, so let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways for your exam. First, positivism. It sees the social world as a real, objective thing we can study scientifically. Second, remember the difference between induction, going from specific to general, and deduction, which is general to specific. Third, the big challenges from interpretivism and realism, which bring in things like subjective meanings and unseeable structures. And finally, and maybe most importantly, remember that the theory you choose will radically change the explanation you come up with. So that leaves us with one last big question to think about as you're studying. Which of these theories really gives us the most complete explanation? I mean, is any single one of them the right one? Or maybe the real truth lies in figuring out how to combine their strengths to understand our incredibly complex social world. Something to think about. Good luck on your exam.